Hello, everyone. Today is Forum Friday, and I apologize if I sound a little bit winded. I just got done doing some cardio myself, and the Texas heat is now kicking my butt. um, so for today, I'm going to focus on only one exercise, and that's going to be the squat. I've had a request for this one, and I just wanted to make sure that I cover my tracks and really be thorough about how this exercise is performed. We'll go through the basics, starting from the feet up. Some concerns prior to going through this movement are going to be mobility issues and stability issues. So, one of the biggest mobility issues is going to be found at the feet. We find our feet to be obviously very useful. We are always walking on them. We use them quite a bit. But what we don't understand is that our feet are our platform. It's where we base most of our stability from. And then our ankles and knees and hips are influenced by how mobile our feet are. So a good way to assess your mobility is checking toe flexibility or mobility. And for that, I'm going to take my shoe off, and then hopefully you guys will be able to see it. What I want to make sure is that I capture some of the mobility concerns that I often see in some of my clients, both in person and online. The biggest issue always comes from the ankle, and that usually comes from stiff muscles in your feet. And so think of your foot as one giant clump of bone, ligaments, and muscle. It's all just very compact into one tight space. And so if you're not really taking care of your feet, you're not going to be able to perform your exercises properly. So hopefully the camera is able to see this. If I were to put my toes and relax my entire foot, I should be able to get at least or close to 90-degree angle between the big toe and the small toe, or the first toe and the last toe, the fifth toe. And that usually indicates a relatively good mobility in the feet. Next to that will be the ankle. A good way to assess the ankle mobility is if you give yourself about 5 inches from your toes to a wall and then lean into that, and there should be at least a 30-degree angle in your shin, and you're just about, or if not, touching the wall in front of you. That's a good indicator of some mobility, or having appropriate mobility. If you cannot get to that, I will be covering that on Mobility Mondays, but rolling out the calf, stretching out the toes, stretching out everything, the entire kinetic chain between the knee and the toes is a good way to begin helping yourself get better in position for a good squat. So, to start, we will always want to start with a shoulder width apart foot stance. This is found to be, I think of it as a pyramid. If you had a pyramid and it had a very narrow base and a very tall height, it would be a very weird pyramid. And so in order to avoid, toppling over or leaning side to side or falling over, you want to have an appropriate base, and this is usually found at or just outside of your shoulder width. Next, you want to address making sure that you have a slight break or a slight hinge at the knees and a slight hinge at the hips. And as you go down, you're going to assess whether or not your knees are caving in or falling out. And you really want it to be as straight as possible. And then as you're coming up, that's usually when you're going to see the biggest mobility issues. That's when they're going to present themselves the most. The most common mobility issue is going to be looking like it's going to be a knee fall or a knee cave in, and that's usually comes from an adductor overcompensation. Our bodies in general, as humans, we go down, and as we're coming up, our knees fall in sometimes, and the biggest reason is going to be either fatigue or too much weight. And if you're doing a body weight exercise, the best way to avoid this is making sure that you are intentional about focusing on that knee cave-in. So if you've got a bar on your back and you're lifting and it's just the bar and nothing else, no weight, and you're finding yourself continuously having your knees cave in, you really want to reduce the amount of weight. So if you've got the bar, let's go down to a straight bar, one of the smaller ones. If you don't have any weight at all, my best suggestion would be doing box squats, and I will cover that here in a second once I get the bar on my back. So again, going back to the base, feet just outside of shoulder width or underneath your shoulders. A lot of trainers say go into hip width or just outside your hips, or having your feet underneath your hips. Again, this goes back to that pyramid idea. You don't want to have a narrow base, because a narrow base will likely lead to a fall, or even worse, having your legs cave in together at one side, and then that could incur an injury. And again, so we have a nice wide base. Next, there's two ways to skin this cat when it comes to toe flare. I personally suggest toe flare, and what that means is bringing your toes out a little bit so that your knees may follow a path. Usually you want your knees to follow the direction your toes are pointing in, and mostly that's coming from having a direct line for your legs to go in rather than them going wherever they want. Again, we can't assess if there's a mobility issue if your knees are just falling or flailing wherever they want. So we're going with shoulder width apart or just outside shoulder width, slight toe flare. This is usually 30-degree angle. Again, no one has a protractor or some crazy gadget where you can see 30 degrees exactly. So my suggestion is just going with a slight, comfortable, or natural feeling toe flare, and then you're going to fall slowly into that gap. As you can see right in here, this space right here is where my belly is going. And it's most comfortable here. Now I've got a little bit of a restriction from the shorts. I've got some running shorts on. But outside of that, it's a very comfortable stance. And coming back up, you don't feel quite any restrictions. At that point, it should be feeling very natural. If it doesn't feel natural, if you feel any rubbing in your bones or any, I don't want to say clicking or popping, mostly because my knee pops every single time I go down. That's not a mobility issue. There's no pain there. It's just from wear and tear. I like to blame the Army for that. But again, making it feel as natural and comfortable as possible is kind of the goal. Outside of that, the main goal is longevity, being able to perform the exercise. And when I say this, I mean it with the intention of looking at it in the future. You don't want to be, reaching higher stages in your life where you are constantly getting injured from just simply sitting down in your car, sitting down to use the bathroom, sitting down on a chair. And the squat, again, is something that we do every single day, i.e. those examples that I just used, the chair, the car, and the bathroom. Everybody sits down to do all of these things. And it's a very natural movement if you make it natural. The only time it doesn't feel natural is when we are in the gym, right? And that's because if we have a weight on our back, we have an additional pressure there, or being hyper focused about the movement, and then we think too much of it. It's a very natural movement, so we're falling into that gap between our knees. I'm trying to give you some cues. Outside of that, this is what it looks like from the side. So I got my feet shoulder width apart. I've got slight toe flare. I've got a little bit of a hip hinge. You always want to start with that. It keeps tension on your quads and on your glutes. If a lot of people say to squeeze your glutes together, I do not allow a whole lot of squeezing for my in-person clients, mostly because when you're upright like this negates that idea again of the pyramid. You always want a slight braced feel, and it's mostly because if you're locked out like this, the chances of you falling forward, falling backwards are significantly increased. So slight hip hinge, slight hinge in the knees, and as you go down, it should almost feel straight down. Sometimes a lot of people say don't let your knees go above your or in front of your toes. There's several studies that have come from that where it's refuted that idea that your knees would get injured. There is a newer concept of having your knees bulletproofed. I will be covering that at a later period, but essentially it's strengthening your knees and making sure that they are able to do other exercises appropriately, including the squat. And then that bulletproofing is actually built more for longevity. Again, it's one of my favorite things in terms of when it comes to the exercise and exercise movements. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and include the bar so that you may see what that looks like. I will not be adding any weight to this. It'll just be simply the bar. Let me get this strap out of the way. Okay, so from the back, I'm going to show you what it looks like. You're going to grab the bar just outside of your shoulders. So this is usually where the knurling stops. Some bars have a soft ring. If yours doesn't, remember it's just outside of the shoulders. So you're grabbing it, you're going in, and then before you get under and pick up that bar, you want to make sure that your feet are directly underneath the bar. Next, you want to focus on your shoulders, making sure that the bar is on top of your shoulders and it's completely across the back, going from shoulder to shoulder on the top side. And you're coming up, and then you're stepping with one good step and then a second good step, going into the focus of getting your feet shoulder width apart and in line with each other, slight toe flare, slight hip hinge, and slight knee bend, and then begin the exercise by going into that movement once again. And then coming back up. And that's it. What that looks like from the front is shoulder width apart, shoulder grip, bar on top of the shoulders from shoulder to shoulder, coming up, and then stepping out. Slight toe flare, feet shoulder width apart and in line with each other, and then going down with that hip hinge and that slight knee bend. Coming down and then going back up. Some cues for you to look for. If you have a mirror, what you can see and look for is in the mirror, I want you to look at the top of your thigh as you go down, and then a good clue that you've made it to full depth is the top of the thigh has now covered the crease of your hip. The next will be that you will, if you pay attention, you will be able to feel your body almost loosen up closer towards the bottom. And that is because we usually are a little bit weaker at the bottom past parallel, and also our ligaments are taking over so that we can bounce back up. So if I were to drop and keep dropping, that's where I lose it and I'll come back up. If you notice there was a slight bounce there, that was my ligaments taking over. The next clue to look for in the squat is making sure that you've got a solid breath at the top. So when you're breathing, you want to make sure that you've got the bar on top, You take that deep breath at the very top. You've got everything else set in place. You take the deep breath, and then you drop down. And as you come back up, that's when you execute the exhale. So you're beginning to exhale when you are putting effort into the exercise. The biggest caveat to that is that in order to practice an appropriate breath, you want to be able to, one good way to know is by squeezing the last rib in your body and then taking a deep breath in through your nose and looking for that hand expansion. So if you notice, my hands separated from each other as I took that deep breath. So it's, and that's called diaphragmatic breathing. It's a good natural belt that you have on yourself at all times. Outside of that, wearing an appropriate belt will help you cue that breath, and it'll keep you very tight. Another thing is when you have the bar on your back, making sure that you've got that bar and you don't just let your arms do whatever they want and going side to side, going up and down on the bar. You want to hold that bar, squeeze the bar with your grip, and also pull it down onto your shoulders a little bit more. Lastly, there are two ways to carry or squat. There is the traditional way, and then there is also a powerlifter's way. Both, if executed appropriately, are wonderful for executing the movement, and I practice both depending on my day of the week and the first or second leg day. So to show you what that looks like, what I did first was the high bar. That's what the first or traditional way of lifting the bar is. And the high bar goes on top of your shoulders and across your traps. The next one is called the low bar grab or the low bar lift, the low bar squat. And you want to think of it as it's sitting on top of the middle top side of your back, almost on the rear delts across the back side of your shoulders. So what that looks like is you want to get a little bit of a wider grip, just slightly, not that much, about a finger's width more. And then you're going in, and instead of going on top, you're going to let the bar slide down to the top side of your rear delts. It's sitting closer to it's sitting lower on your back. You have a harder hip hinge and a slight more bend in your knees. And it's the same thing. You're just going down. It's the same concept. With this squat right here, the low bar, you have a little bit more of a mobility restriction when it comes to getting further down in terms of depth. And that's just a mobility issue that we all have as natural with our bodies. There's a stop there when it comes to the hips. It's very difficult to talk about it without going into mobility. But again, I've separated mobility Mondays for that reason, because I want to address mobility on its own. It's going to be one of, if not the second most important part of this entire exercise program. The last thing that I want to show you is what I talked about before, which is the natural sitting and standing, and kind of covers everything that I've talked about before through this squat, which is sitting down and standing up. So here I am sitting on a chair. Everything's comfortable, everything's relaxed, and I want you to try this the next time that you find yourself sitting down in a chair. Next thing I know, I need to stand up. The first thing I'm going to do is find that equilibrium. And if you notice, my body is bent over. The first thing it does is lean forward, right? That's because I'm looking for that natural balance, the center of gravity, so to speak. But my feet, we don't usually sit down with our feet close together, right? And nobody really ever stands up with their feet super wide apart. We usually find a very comfortable space where we stand up so our feet are positioned, ready to go standing, and we just lean forward and stand up. That's essentially the squat. We squat in that same way because it's natural. And you can see there's a 90-degree angle. Usually you have a 90-degree angle unless you're very petite or very short, or you're a very tall person. And when I say very tall, I mean it's 6'5" or higher. And I don't believe we have anyone that tall. I'm not sure in terms of height if we have any short people, or as I like to say, vertically challenged, because I myself am vertically challenged. But yeah, I think that covers everything. I would love to see any videos to give any form check or any clues on what to do next or how to best set up yourself for success in terms of your squat. So if you have any videos that you can shoot in the comments, I would love to check them out and then give you some feedback on that. I just remembered one more thing, and that is if you are finding yourself with a knee cave-in or an adductor takeover, as I like to call it, one good way to help yourself to prevent that is by taking a abductor band, putting it around your knees, and then going in practicing the squat while stretching out that band, holding that tension the entire time through the squat. That's a great way to do it. That's a great way to practice that. But again, that is part of the mobility portion of this entire program, and so I would love to cover that on Monday when that comes around. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye.